America has a drug problem. Everyone knows that. But few people realize that the drugs that are by far the most widely used and that do by far the most damage are alcohol and nicotine. These drugs are also two of our most heavily advertised products. Now, the topic of alcohol and tobacco often arouses very strong feelings, and I'd like to acknowledge that right away. Some people become immediately defensive at any mention of alcohol or tobacco-related problems and see any such discussion as prohibitionist or as a threat to individual rights and freedom. I sympathize with this because I think we need to be very wary in our society today of threats to our freedom. However, I hope to demonstrate that the gravest threat to our freedom comes from corporations that are bent on increasing profit no matter what the cost to public health and to private lives. And it is those who are callously promoting addiction who are the real destroyers of our freedom. So this presentation is about alcohol and tobacco advertising, but on a much deeper level, it's about freedom. Freedom from addiction, freedom from denial, and freedom from manipulation and censorship. Let's begin with a look at the advertising for our deadliest drug, which is nicotine. Nicotine doesn't damage the fabric of society in quite the way that alcohol and other drugs do, but it certainly kills more people than all other drugs combined. Cigarettes kill more Americans each year than alcohol, cocaine, heroin, car crashes, homicides, suicides, and AIDS combined. Nothing else comes close. This is over 440,000 deaths every single year. Smoking is by far the single most preventable cause of death, and yet we sell cigarettes in pharmacies, we sell them in candy stores to children. In the 20th century, tobacco killed more people than war. The economic costs of smoking are also staggering. Smoking-related health care costs in the United States are over $75 billion a year, and lost productivity costs over $82 billion a year. These losses amount to over $7 per pack sold in the U.S. We now know that cigarette smoke is harmful to non-smokers. In fact, it can be lethal, and is particularly dangerous to children. It's related to respiratory diseases, of course, asthma, bronchitis, but it's also related to attention deficit disorder, leukemia, and sudden infant death syndrome. Nicotine is the most addictive drug of all, as addictive as cocaine and heroin, and for many people it is the hardest one to kick. I know this from personal experience. I started smoking when I was 13, which is still about the average age, and I started for all the reasons that kids start to smoke. I wanted to seem sexier, wilder, more glamorous, more grown up. It didn't help with this, but it did leave me with an addiction that it took me many, many years to kick. It may be the hardest thing I've ever done. So I have tremendous sympathy for smokers. I am not anti-smoker at all. What I am is anti the tobacco industry. Now, we all know that advertising often lies, but nowhere is that more obvious than in cigarette ads. We have all these young, healthy people alive with pleasure, which I'm sure beats dead with cancer as a slogan. But it's certainly not the truth. Men are told they owe their freedom, their independence, indeed their masculinity to their Marlboros, although the evidence is clear that cigarettes are linked with lower testosterone count, sterility, and impotence. But I guess we couldn't expect truth in advertising, could we? As one medical expert said, smoking is clearly hazardous to your erection. Did you know that Marlboros began as a cigarette designed for women? The cigarettes came with red tips so the lipstick wouldn't show. They were so thoughtful. But Philip Morris, the makers of Marlboro, fairly quickly realized that this was not a good idea. Women will almost always use a product designed for men, but God forbid that a man would use a product designed for women. How many men do you know who smoke Virginia Slims? So they repositioned Marlboro as the ultimate man's cigarette with the image of the cowboy, which of course has been phenomenally successful. Marlboro is the leading cigarette brand in the world. More people who smoke, women as well as men, girls as well as boys, smoke Marlboros by far than any other brand. Over half of all teenage smokers in America smoke Marlboros. And there's no mystery why. It's the most heavily advertised cigarette by far. Today, in spite of all the attention that's been paid to tobacco recently, the tobacco industry, just in the United States, spends over $9 billion every year in advertising and promotion. $9 billion. That's over $26 million every day. Yet they swear that this advertising has no effect. It doesn't influence anyone. They say the whole point of all that advertising is just to get adult smokers to switch brands. This couldn't possibly be true. About 10% of smokers switch brands every year, and this includes smokers who switch within a brand, going to lighter versions of the same brand, for example. 10%, certainly not enough to warrant $9 billion worth of advertising. The tobacco industry obviously is in the business of getting people to start smoking. They're constantly recruiting new users. Why? Because when you're selling a product that kills people, you've got a problem. Your best customers die. It happens all the time. It's very inconvenient. The tobacco industry, just in America, has to get 3,000 children to start smoking every single day, simply to replace those smokers who die or quit. 2,000 smokers quit every day, and 1,000 smokers die. The tobacco industry needs children to replace them. Why children? Because almost 90% of smokers start before they're 18, 60% start before high school. If you don't start smoking when you're very young, you're not going to start. The peak years for beginning to smoke are in the 6th and 7th grades. A few years ago, a whistleblower at a big tobacco company released hundreds of thousands of confidential documents. The documents make it clear that the tobacco industry spends billions of dollars on psychological research. They also make it clear that the tobacco industry targets children. Consider the following quotes. Philip Morris. Today's teenager is tomorrow's potential regular customer, and the overwhelming majority of smokers first begin to smoke while still in their teens. R.J. Reynolds. Evidence is now available to indicate that the 14 to 18-year-old group is an increasing segment of the smoking population. R.J. Reynolds must soon establish a successful new brand in this market if our position in the industry is to be maintained. Lorillard Tobacco. The base of our business is the high school student. The tobacco industry spends billions of dollars on psychological research, exploring what motivates people to start smoking and what makes it difficult for people to quit. They know, for example, that smoking isn't very pleasant in the beginning. I gagged on my first cigarette, as most people do. A Philip Morris memo said, "To account for the fact that the beginning smoker will not tolerate the unpleasantness, we must invoke a psychosocial motive. Smoking a cigarette for the beginner is a symbolic act." In other words, they have to provide a psychological motive to young smokers that's powerful enough to counteract the initial unpleasantness of smoking. As the force from the psychological symbolism subsides, the pharmacological effect takes over to sustain. To translate this into English, what they're saying is that they have to use the psychological motivation only until addiction takes place. Fortunately for the tobacco industry, nicotine is the most addictive drug of all. It takes only a few weeks for most people to become addicted. Another ploy that the tobacco industry uses to hook young people is the theme of excitement and adventure. For many years, R.J. Reynolds' identity was intertwined with NASCAR, where the main prize was called the Winston Cup. An R.J. Reynolds report said, "The nature of excitement to the young smoker is living on the edge in their behavior and/or in their imagination. Position a brand against the heart-thumping moment when you are at the edge. Capture the feeling of being at the edge, and then sow the victorious feeling afterward when you light up and enjoy a cigarette and feel good about yourself because you have conquered the edge." Above all, the tobacco industry wants to convince young people that smoking is cool. So they use sexy, young, attractive people in their ads. An R.J. Reynolds memo said, "Camel advertising will create the perception that Camel smokers are nonconformists, self-confident, and project a cool attitude, which is admired by peers. Aspiration to be perceived as a cool member of the in-group is one of the strongest influences affecting the behavior of younger adult smokers." Research is clear that teens are more sensitive to tobacco advertising than are adults, and that teens are more likely to be influenced to smoke by cigarette advertising than by peer pressure. 88% of teens who smoke one of 3 brands: Camels, Marlboros, Newports. I'm sure that every one of these young people would say that advertising has nothing to do with their choice of brand, but almost 90% of them are smoking one of the 3 most heavily advertised brands. Young people are also seduced by the sellers of spit tobacco. Today, 14% of high school boys use spit tobacco. The development of starter products with such features as pouches and cherry flavoring have switched spit tobacco from a product used primarily by older men to one used primarily by young men and boys. As one tobacco company executive said, "Cherry Skull is for somebody who likes the taste of candy, if you know what I'm saying." The tobacco industry doesn't just target children. It also targets the 80 or 90% of smokers who want to quit. The industry refers to these people as pre-quitters. Most smokers want to quit almost as soon as they become addicted. To counter this desire to quit, the advertising has to minimize the health dangers of smoking. Tobacco ads full of young, healthy people engaged in all kinds of physical activities are designed to reassure smokers that they really don't need to quit. As one former tobacco industry marketing consultant said, "The problem is, how do you sell death? You do it with the great open spaces, the mountains, the open places, the lakes coming up to the shore. They do it with healthy young people. How could a whiff of a cigarette be of any harm in a situation like that? It couldn't be. There's too much fresh air, too much health, too much absolute exuding of youth and vitality." In the ads, the smokers are always having a lot of fun. In truth, a heavy smoker is about 4 times more likely than normal to have a history of major depression. This doesn't mean that cigarettes depress you. It means that if you're depressed, you're more likely to smoke. These days, people who start smoking and who are unable to quit are increasingly those who are depressed. The mentally ill have extremely high smoking rates. What this means, of course, is that it's our most vulnerable children who are at risk. Kids with low self-image, kids who are being physically abused, kids who drop out of school are far more likely to smoke. The tobacco industry knows this, of course. They do this research, too. This is David Gerlitz, who for years was a model for Winston. Now he lectures against the industry. He feels ashamed about what he did. He says he was on a shoot once, and he noticed that none of the guys in the industry were smoking. And he said to one of them, "Do any of you smoke?" And the executive turned to him and said, "Are you kidding? We reserve that right for the young, the poor, the black, and the stupid." In general today, the lower one's status, one's income, one's educational achievements, the less powerful one is in our society's terms, the more likely one is to smoke. In spite of this link between smoking and oppression, however, African American and Hispanic teens have long had lower smoking rates than Caucasians. But their rates are increasing as they are increasingly targeted by the tobacco industry. The tobacco companies know that most African American smokers prefer menthol cigarettes, and they exploit this fact in their marketing efforts to African Americans in general and to African American kids in particular. The aggressive advertising of these mentholated brands by the major cigarette companies has paid off. While about 40% of black adults smoke Newport, roughly 80% of black young people smoke this brand. Asian American and Pacific Islanders have the lowest smoking rates for all major American racial and ethnic groups, but they too are increasingly targeted. Another ploy these days is to present the smoker as someone who is heroically resisting the conformist pressure of society. Judge me all you want, just keep the verdict to yourself. This plays upon the fact that smokers are being increasingly marginalized these days, and makes it seem as if smoking is a statement of autonomy and freedom and independence. At least you can still smoke in your car. This ad appeals to people who feel very hemmed in, feel that they have little control over their lives for all kinds of reasons. They can focus this general feeling of powerlessness on the fact that they aren't allowed to smoke in as many places as before. I get enough bull at work, I don't need to smoke it. This, of course, appeals to people in low-level jobs and also to kids who resent authority figures. One Camel campaign featured attractive, defiant smokers, in this case the maid who's flicking ashes into the food she's about to serve. Another example of this approach, this ploy, is this billboard. Finally, a butt worth kissing. They're so tasteful. This is meaningful to people who feel powerless and who feel they have to kowtow to all kinds of other people. Here's to women who can light their own cigarettes, as if this is all it would take for a woman, especially a woman of color, to feel powerful. We also must not be taken in by their so-called anti-smoking ads or their slogans like, tobacco is wacko. That's really going to stop kids from smoking, right?
So take heed to my words, I'm trying to bless the kids. That tobacco is whack, yo, yes it is.
The research indicates that these ads are actually very cleverly designed to increase smoking by young people. The big tobacco company Brown & Williamson made this clear in a memo. Brown & Williamson will not support a youth smoking program which discourages young people from smoking. The tobacco industry's efforts should be seen for what they are: public relations ploys designed to improve their image and forestall government action. Philip Morris made that clear in a recent internal document. If we don't do something fast to project the sense of industry responsibility, we are going to be looking at severe marketing restrictions in a very short time. Feature films have also turned into marketing opportunities for tobacco companies. A recent study found that smoking occurred in feature films much more frequently than in real life, and countless studies have proved a link between smoking in films and increased smoking by kids. The tobacco industry knows that placing a cigarette in the hands of sexy and popular stars is the best way to glamorize its product in the eyes of young people especially.
Cigarette? No?
There's no smoking in this building, Miss Trammell.
What are you going to do? Charge me with smoking?
Screenwriter Joe Esterhazy, recently diagnosed with throat cancer, the result of a lifetime of smoking, wrote a letter to the Hollywood community in which he said, "What we are doing by showing larger-than-life movie stars smoking on screen is glamorizing smoking. A cigarette in the hands of a Hollywood star on screen is a gun aimed at a 12 or 14-year-old. These days, smoking rates for girls are reaching the rates for boys for the first time ever. The rise in smoking by young women corresponds with the introduction of Virginia Slims. Within 6 years of the Virginia Slims launch in 1968, the percentage of teenage girls who smoked nearly doubled. It was phenomenally successful, this launch. Tragically, this rise is also linked with dramatic increase in lung cancer rates among women. In the past 20 years, lung cancer for women has increased nationwide by more than 400%, surpassing breast cancer as the leading cancer killer of women. Women who smoke like men die like men. Women have extra risks too. Smoking is linked to cervical cancer and osteoporosis, and to a host of problems with pregnancy and birth, including infertility, stillbirth, and long-term damage to babies. Smoking has long been linked by advertisers to liberation and freedom for women. Virginia Slim's first slogan was the infamous "You've come a long way, baby." The more recent Find Your Voice campaign also promised empowerment for women via addiction. This campaign exploited multiculturalism as well, with ads featuring African American, Latina, and Asian women in this country and throughout the world. Tobacco advertisers continue to use the theme of liberation and freedom in ads targeting women. They also imply that smoking is sexy and will make a woman more desirable. These days, girls are told over and over again that smoking will not only keep them slim and lead them to liberation, but that cigarettes are a kind of beauty accessory. Smoke and you too will be so sexy and confident you can throw a man down on the beach and have your way with him. Of course, there's a long history of sexualizing smoking. I recently discovered that there's a sexual fetish known as smoking glamour, which is based on this sexualization of smoking. There are websites such as Sexy Smokers and Cigarette Sluts. There's even a category of modeling with agencies specializing in this genre. None of this should surprise us, of course, as smoking and fashion have been very closely connected for many years. Kate Moss has been at the leading edge of this trend. One reason women and girls smoke and are afraid to quit is their terror of gaining weight. The slimmest slim in town. You'll rarely see a cigarette ad aimed at women and girls that doesn't use the words slim, slender, or copy like this. If I ran the world, calories wouldn't count. Of course, they do count, and here she's able to resist the plate of food because she has a cigarette. So Virginia Slims, no coincidence, is telling young women and girls, you can't eat, but you can smoke. The women's magazines are filled with ads featuring very slim models. This is a fashion layout. It isn't even an ad. But if you look in the lower right, you'll see Dexatrim pills, making it very clear that she looks like this because she's using diet pills. This is deliberate. How deliberate is it? Extremely. I'm going to show you a series of ads now that you've probably never seen before. These ads are from Advertising Age, the major publication of the advertising industry. What these ads will show you is how the advertisers advertise to each other and to corporate executives. We're not meant to see these ads. This is what goes on behind the scenes. Hey, Coke wants 17.5 million very interested women to think diet. What's happening here? Here, the Ladies' Home Journal is advertising itself directly to the executives of Coca-Cola as a terrific place to put their Diet Coke ads. And what they are promising them is a magazine that will make women obsessed about their weight, a magazine that will make women think diet. This ad comes as a real surprise to most people because most people have never been educated about advertising and therefore don't know about what goes on behind the scenes. And most people don't know the central fact about advertising and the media, which is that we are the product. Capture your audience. Here our eyeballs are in a net being delivered to the advertisers. Here's another one from Ad Age. 17, they're the ones you want, they're the ones we've got. 17, it's more than a magazine, it's their life. Just in case you thought you could escape all this on the internet, here's an ad for a magazine called Shop Online 123, which promises a free hookup to your customer's head. I don't think it could be any clearer exactly what's being sold and for what purpose. We've always been told that the program is brought to us by the sponsor, but the truth is exactly the opposite. We are brought to the sponsor by the program. They've learned recently that about 20% of young people are leaders and about 80% are followers, which means that all they have to do is target the leaders. So MTV said recently in an ad in Ad Age aimed at advertisers, buy this 24-year-old and get all his friends absolutely free. The copy says, if this guy doesn't know about you, you're toast. He's an opinion leader. He watches MTV. And he's no loner. He heads up a pack. What he eats, his friends eat. What he likes, they like. MTV, a darn good way to influence the MTV generation. Think about the difference between this ad and MTV's public face. Publicly, what they say to young people is, you're so independent, you're such free thinkers. But behind the scenes, what they are saying to advertisers is, our viewers are lemmings, they will follow their leaders right over a cliff. They will buy whatever you sell them, as long as you package it right. Americans rely on the media for our health information, but there's a tremendous amount of distortion and censorship on behalf of advertisers. Life magazine devoted a whole issue to how can we keep our children safe. One of the topics was drugs, but they didn't mention alcohol or tobacco, the two drugs that are by far the most destructive and dangerous for our children. Look at the cigarette ad on the back cover. They couldn't mention tobacco. They would lose that ad, which is worth a couple of $100,000 to them. They couldn't, they wouldn't, they don't. I think this is the kind of censorship that we have to fear the most in our country today. Not so much censorship of the press by the government, but censorship of the press on behalf of these huge, powerful, multinational conglomerates, the sellers of alcohol, tobacco, junk food, diet products, and more. Just as it's difficult to be healthy in a toxic physical environment, if we're drinking polluted water, let's say, or breathing poisoned air. So it's difficult to be healthy in what I call a toxic cultural environment, an environment that surrounds us with unhealthy messages and that constantly sacrifices our health and our children's health for the sake of corporate profit. Now let's take a look at how our other major drug is sold, alcohol. The alcohol industry spends $3 billion a year on advertising. Alcohol advertising is really our main form of alcohol education. Our attitudes about alcohol have been shaped primarily by the alcohol industry.
I love burritos at 4 a.m., parties that never end, dogs that love cats, and twins, and I love you too. It's the love song.
The joy of six. This clearly normalizes heavy drinking. Here's a six-pack as if it were a serving. It also links alcohol with both sex and happiness, instantly, mostly unconsciously. Alcohol advertising is designed not only to get us to drink, but to develop certain attitudes about drinking. And this is done very consciously. As one advertising psychologist said, this is someone who works for the industry, more and more it seems the liquor industry has awakened to the truth. It isn't selling bottles or glasses or even liquor. It's selling fantasies. Of course, we can argue that all advertising sells fantasies, and to a great extent this is true. But not all advertising is for the nation's most destructive drug. Alcohol is related to parties, to good times, to fun, but it's also related to depression, suicide, murder, violence. Of course, these connections are never made in the ads, and in general they are not made throughout the media. As a result, we get only a fraction of the whole story. Above all, these days, they tell us that alcohol is a magic potion that will give us terrific sex. Get it started, says an ad for Bud Light that puts the bottle literally into the act. Pursue your daydreams. Ad after ad after ad has messages like this. Drizzle it all over your dessert. You might even try it on the ice cream. The alcohol industry spends a fortune trying to convince us that alcohol is related to wonderful, free, uninhibited sex. Vegetarian by day, Bacardi by night. Kahlua mudslide. Take your pants off and stay a while. Size does matter. We all constantly get the message that alcohol will improve our sex lives.
Ladies, you know, the ocean has many voices, and it's saying, why don't you two join this handsome gentleman for a Bud Light? All right, that's what I thought.
Young men in particular are constantly told that alcohol will make them great lovers. As many of us know, there's another side to this. Shakespeare put it best when he said, "Drink provokes the desire, but it takes away the performance." The truth is that the relationship between alcohol and sex is disastrous. Alcohol is related to sexually transmitted diseases, especially AIDS. It's related to rape, especially date rape and gang rape. It's related to unwanted pregnancy. And it's related to sexual dysfunction for women as well as for men. That's the truth. But I guess we couldn't expect truth in advertising, could we? This is, of course, a parody, another spoof of an ad from Adbusters. Alcohol advertising often sexualizes the bottle itself. Whoops, my top fell off. It's very bizarre when you think about it. Or this one, man's other true love. Good head, beautiful body. You never forget your first girl. Italy's classics have always had great shapes. You'd even know us in the nude. What guy doesn't like a little extra now and then? 24, 12, 24. Absolute Marilyn. Absolute centerfold. Other aspects of the drink are also sexualized. It's enough to make a cherry blush, tease, a twist. Even the cork gets in on the act. It's not a stopper, it's a starter. Alcohol advertising turns the bottle into a woman, and it often turns the woman into the bottle, as in this Michelob ad. Sometimes the woman is literally inside the bottle. Women's bodies are increasingly connected with alcohol in the ads. Often the brands and logos are literally imprinted on women's bodies, as in this champagne ad where the flower pattern from the bottle is repeated on the back of a naked woman. Or this Martell ad where the body of another naked woman is tattooed with the brand. Men are generally assumed to be sexist jerks in alcohol advertising, interested in having sex with women, but terrified of real relationships and intimacy. Women and men like different things. Of course, women have long been stereotyped and objectified in alcohol advertising, particularly in beer commercials. This objectification creates a climate in which there's widespread and increasing violence against women. I'm not saying that ads like this directly cause violence, but they are part of a cultural climate where women are seen as things, as objects, and this puts real women at risk. Often, violence against women is alcohol-related. Over half of all rapes and all cases of battering are alcohol-related. This doesn't mean that alcohol is the cause, sexism is the cause, but alcohol is a contributing factor. Alcohol is especially related to date rape on college campuses, which is a major problem throughout the country. 1 in 5 college women are sexually assaulted, and 90% know their assailants. Given the extent of date rape, many ads are extremely irresponsible, such as ads in which women are in submissive poses, men in aggressive poses. Or an ad like this, where the woman seems to be arriving alone at a party where a group of men is waiting for her. Take your best shot. Many ads imply that alcohol will lead to unexpected consequences. Sometimes these ads are ominous, such as, "The night began with a bottle of Cuervo and ended with a vow of silence." Over half of all violent crimes are linked with alcohol. Alcohol is a drug that often makes people aggressive, belligerent, violent, but sometimes advertising even makes light of this. Adult Americans are drinking less these days. Over a third of adult Americans don't drink at all. So the alcohol industry has been trying to open up new markets. They're trying to get groups that don't drink much to drink more. One group they're very heavily targeting is young women. Girls today are 4 times more likely to begin drinking before age 14 than their mothers were. 12% of 8th grade girls reported binge drinking in the past 2 weeks. This ad is typical of alcohol advertising in young women's magazines, politically correct by day, Bacardi by night. What this ad is saying to women is, don't worry about the health consequences of drinking and smoking, just relax, have a good time. It turns a public health issue into an issue of political correctness. Here, Budweiser tells young women that alcohol will increase their confidence and their sex appeal and enable them to live like a king. According to this Bud ad, apparently they drink the same thing on Venus and Mars. Well, maybe so, but it doesn't have the same effect. Women have less than men do of a certain stomach enzyme that's necessary to metabolize alcohol, which means that women get drunk more quickly than men, and the disease of alcoholism progresses more quickly for women than it does for men. In addition, alcohol increases women's risk of pregnancy complications, fertility problems, breast cancer, and depression. And women, of course, are the primary victims of sexual assault. Women are offered alcohol as a way to be more independent and also as a way to break the rules. In ads like this, be at least capable of bad. Bad girls make good company. Rules, I make them up as I go along. This is a terrible distortion of the true meaning of freedom for women and of sexuality. Just as the tobacco industry swears they don't target children, so does the alcohol industry. But of course they do. They use cartoon characters, talking frogs, talking lizards, all kinds of techniques that are designed to attract children.
Budweiser.
All right, we're
They have to attract children because the younger people are when they start drinking, the greater the risk of addiction. If you start drinking when you're 15, you're 4 times more likely to become an alcoholic than if you wait till you're older. Addiction is bad news for most of us, but it's the name of the game for the alcohol and tobacco industries. They want to get young people because when you hook them early, they are yours for life. In 2001, the alcohol industry introduced 130 new spirits, 46 new beers, and 103 new wines. A lot of these were products that were aimed at a very young audience. The sweet-tasting drinks trumpet the brand names of hard liquors like Bacardi, Stolichnaya, Captain Morgan, and Smirnoff. Thus, ads for these drinks not only promote the products, they are a backdoor way for liquor companies to put their brand names in front of young audiences on network television.
Jack Daniel's Original Hard Cola, the premium malt beverage with a refreshingly different cola taste. Come as you are.
According to Anheuser-Busch's new products director, the beauty of this category is it brings in new drinkers, people who really don't like the taste of beer. In a way, the alcohol industry has the same problem the tobacco industry does of getting kids over the initial initiation phase of not liking the taste. Here an ad for Citras says, having trouble imagining a 60-proof drink that actually tastes great? Young people are of great importance to the alcohol industry, not only because they might become addicted in the future, but because they spend a lot of money on alcohol in the present. The most widely used illegal drug in America is beer. In fact, very specifically, the most widely used illegal drug is Budweiser, because it is the drug of choice for young people.
I've got some Bud Light.
Underage drinkers account for 12% of all alcohol sales. Recent evidence indicates that alcohol damages the brains of young people and that the damage may be irreversible. The leading causes of death for young people in America are automobile crashes and other unintentional injuries, homicides and suicides, many of which are alcohol-related. So alcohol could be considered the leading cause of death for young people in America. The beer industry targets young people, deliberately putting their ads in youth-oriented publications and on television and radio shows.
Life beckons, and you're holding the key.
As a result, young people see more ads for beer than for jeans or sneakers or gum. The alcohol industry also targets young people via the internet. One study found that over 80% of beer websites and over 70% of distilled spirits websites use techniques that are particularly attractive to underage audiences, as compared with only 10% of wine websites. These techniques include cartoon characters and trendy rock bands.
Now, for you music fans, the music section on Budweiser.com is the place to find today's hottest bands.
The alcohol industry has taken over whole worlds that are important to young people. The world of music.
The Rolling Rock Town Fair is taking over Pittsburgh's Heinz Field July 26th.
The world of sports.
NBA playoffs, brought to you by Miller Lite. Life is best told over a great-tasting Miller Lite at a place called Miller Time.
The college market is especially important to the alcohol industry because college students drink more than their non-college peers. The college alcohol market is an over $5 billion a year market, and college students in America spend more money on alcohol than on books. But it is not just the money they spend in the present that matters to the alcohol industry. They are developing habits and even addictions that will stay with them for life. As one alcohol industry executive said, "Let's not forget that getting a freshman to choose a certain brand of beer may mean that he will maintain his brand loyalty for the next 20 to 35 years. If he turns out to be a big drinker, the beer company has bought itself an annuity." So the alcohol industry is investing in college students. What is the downside of this investment? Drinking is the #1 problem on every college campus in the country. On an average day, 4 college students die in alcohol-related accidents. An additional 1,370 suffer injuries related to drinking, and about 192 college women are raped by their dates or sexually assaulted after drinking every day. Of students in college in America today, the same percentage will eventually die of alcohol-related causes as will get advanced degrees. Serious as the alcohol problem is on college campuses, however, it is important not to exaggerate it or to assume that all college students have drinking problems. The media focus on binge drinkers can be misleading and inflammatory. In any environment, including college campuses, a few people are doing most of the drinking. Probably the most important fact to know about alcohol is that 10% of the drinking population consumes over 60% of all the alcohol sold. If we were to picture this as 10 drinkers around a table, it would look like this. All Americans 14 years and older are represented by these 10 people seated around a table. On the table are 10 glasses containing all the alcohol consumed. 3 people will drink nothing. 3 people will share 1 glass. 3 people will share 2 glasses. And 1 person will drink 7 glasses full of alcohol. So a relatively small percentage of people are doing most of the drinking and are causing most of the problems for themselves and for other people. Some of these people are alcoholics, but not all of them. They are, however, without question, the best customers of the alcohol industry. The alcohol industry constantly says that it wants people to drink responsibly, but they will never define what they mean by that. The truth is that so-called responsible drinking would destroy them. If every adult in America drank according to the federal guidelines of what's low-risk drinking, which is no more than 1 drink a day for a woman, no more than 2 drinks a day for a man, if every adult in America drank according to these guidelines, alcohol industry sales would be cut by 80%. The industry would be devastated. The alcohol industry needs people to drink very heavily. The heavy user is, of course, their best customer. But when the product is a drug, the heavy user is almost always an addict or at least a person in desperate trouble. And every time an addict recovers, someone loses money, whether it's the pusher on the corner or the pusher in the boardroom. As a spokesperson for Anheuser-Busch, makers of Budweiser, said, "We are not a social services agency that happens to make beer. We are a beer company whose primary goal is to maximize profits for our shareholders, and that means selling as much beer as we can." So the purpose of alcohol advertising is not only to attract young people, but to reassure the high-risk drinker and everyone around that person, his friends, family, doctors, the whole culture, that his or her drinking is normal, is perfectly okay. I believe the primary purpose of alcohol advertising is to create a climate of denial. People in trouble with alcohol are all obsessed with alcohol, and advertising, and to some extent our whole culture, glorifies and normalizes this obsession.
Sky blue.
A recent Coors commercial made it clear that every day is an occasion for drinking.
We rock the party. Wednesday rocks, we rock the party. Ain't never gonna stop, we rock the party. Everybody rock, we rock the party. Come on, let's rock the party.
Who is it?
Sasha and Amber.
It's time to rock, let's rock the party.
Alcohol advertising ingeniously glorifies symptoms of alcoholism and problem drinking, further creating a climate of denial. How a night out with the guys became a long weekend. This ad is encouraging binge drinking, and it's also encouraging drinking more than you intended to when you started out. Always a sign of trouble. You're going to call your boyfriend back home as soon as you can remember his name. This glamorizes blackouts, another sign of trouble. Very few people come out of blackouts on tropical islands. That isn't usually what happens. The climate of denial is encouraged in other ways, too, not just through alcohol advertising. An article in Cosmopolitan about morning after remorse following drunken sex offers several remedies, such as the morning after pill, but doesn't recommend drinking less. Not surprisingly, the article is opposite an ad for alcohol. Cosmo wouldn't want to bite the hand that feeds it, after all. Efforts to have alcohol included in the federal anti-drug campaign have been defeated twice in Congress. This is not surprising, given the huge amounts of money that the alcohol industry gives to politicians. Because the government won't get involved, the alcohol industry is the primary provider of educational messages about alcohol abuse on TV. This is like putting the mafia in charge of crime prevention, or putting Exxon in charge of cleaning up the environment. When the alcohol industry does run prevention messages, it focuses almost exclusively on the issue of drunk driving, because it won't lose any money there.
Hey, Tim. Thanks for being the designated driver.
Dale, thanks for being designated driver.
No problem, man.
The designated driver simply gives other people permission to get wasted.
Up here. Hey, Mr. Fisher! Slow down.
Cindy!
What's going on? What's up?
Such ads completely ignore all the other damage and destruction that is linked with alcohol, as if drinking and driving were the only problem. One such commercial shows a man arriving at a party. Clearly intending to get drunk, he slashes his tires to prevent himself from driving later on, and then he enters the house. Just what the other party guests want, a drunk man with a knife. What can we do about all of this? Obviously, we need to get people into treatment. We need to treat alcoholics. We need to treat the children of alcoholics. We need to help smokers quit. All of this is extremely important. But most important, we need to work on prevention. We need to stop these problems before they start. This means addressing these issues as public health issues. The obsession with thinness is a public health issue. Violence against women is a public health issue. High-risk drinking, smoking are all public health issues. And public health issues can be solved only by changing the environment. That means taking the focus off the individual and putting it on the whole world in which the individual lives, the world that influences the choices that people make. We've made tremendous progress with tobacco ever since we addressed it as a public health problem and shifted the focus from the individual smoker to the tobacco industry and the environment. We did things like raise taxes on the product. Raising taxes on tobacco and on alcohol is the single most effective way to reduce consumption by young people. Some states raise taxes on tobacco and use the money for aggressive counter-advertising, for prevention and education programs in the schools, and other strategies. The states that did this, such as California, Massachusetts, Arizona, have had enormous success. Smoking rates are way below average in these states. We know what works. It's no mystery what works. What we lack is the political will to achieve it. Counter-advertising is a very important part of an environmental strategy. Advertising that gives us honest information, but also advertising that de-glamorizes the product. Ads like this billboard that's all over California these days. The Truth Campaign and other counter-advertising campaigns on television have been very successful.
We're going to leave this here for you so you can see what 1,200 people actually look like.
We need a similar campaign for alcohol. We also should be teaching media literacy in our schools, educating our kids to be critical viewers. And we all need to become more conscious of our attitudes about these products and where these attitudes come from, because we are paying an enormous price. Major industries are spending billions of dollars, not just selling addictive products, but selling attitudes. Scientists predict global warming, Miller tells us. No problem. Don't worry about the destruction of the environment, just have another beer. And here is Southern Comfort's solution to global warming. It doesn't matter, just have another drink. No wonder so many people feel powerless and helpless and would rather be drunk, would rather be numb. But that very numbing makes it difficult to solve these problems. We lose a lot of our best people. We lose a lot of our best energy. In particular these days, we all too often lose the passion and the idealism of our young people. And this is a loss we cannot afford. Above all these days, the alcohol industry and the tobacco industry want all of us, especially young people, to define freedom as our right to drink and our right to smoke. This trivializes freedom. It trivializes us. Addiction is the opposite of freedom. But we let them use the Statue of Liberty to sell cigarettes. Here the alcohol industry tells us the world has a thirst for freedom, and indeed it does, but all too often what they're selling us is slavery. We have a right to be healthy, we have a right to be safe, we have a right to be free from addiction, and we have a right to be free from manipulation and censorship. This is real freedom. We must fight for it and cherish it. Thank you very much.